Welcome to Boardroom Books, a podcast where I break down the stories of history's greatest companies and their founders by reading great history books. Today we're learning about the founding and management philosophy of Patagonia and its founder, Yvon Chouinard. I just read Chouinard's book, Let My People Go Surfing, and he opens the book with this quote that I've been thinking about nonstop since I finished the book. He says, "No young kid growing up ever dreams of someday becoming a businessman. He wants to be a fireman, a sponsored athlete, or a forest ranger. The Koch brothers and Donald Trumps of the business world are heroes to no one except other businessmen with similar values." That got me, man. I'm a very childish person. I love playing. I love working with kids. I love just goofing off. And that hit me hard, realizing how much ambition and desire can get shaped and stolen from us because of the goals other people put on us. Nard was nothing like that. He was an uncommon man among uncommon men. He did not pursue business primarily for money's sake. His background as a person and his philosophy of business are a really odd blend of effective capitalist, but also a nature-loving outdoorsman. I'm going to dig into his business philosophy in the second half of the episode. But first, I want to tell the story of Chouinard, his climbing company, and Patagonia. His family moved to Burbank when he was in elementary school, so he grew up in Southern California outside of Los Angeles. He was kind of an outcast in high school, had pimples, couldn't dance, wasn't interested in school, was always in detention. But on weekends, he'd go freediving in the Pacific Ocean, and he joined this group called the Southern California Falconry Club, where they literally would train hawks and falcons to hunt. So cool. Did a little bit of extra research on this, and it was a really fascinating group of people that had lobbying in the government for falcons and predatory birds. But he said that that falconry club was the most formative time of his life because he got in a community, learned the outdoors, a whole bunch of interesting things. So this kid is a total outdoorsman, loves to surf, loves to climb above all else. So in 1957, around college age, he buys from a junkyard a coal forge, an anvil, tongs, and a hammer. And remember, he went to a junkyard for this stuff. And with junkyard blacksmith equipment, he teaches himself how to blacksmith because he wants to make his own hardware for rock climbing. Background on this. At the time, in the 50s, if you were going to climb a really big wall, like one of the ones in Central California at Yosemite National Park, you needed a whole bunch of little things to nail into the rock, pitons. Frick, is that how you say it? I don't want to be a complete idiot. And to get up an entire climb, you needed hundreds and hundreds of these pitons. Europeans are the ones who started the climbing craze, and their mindset when they would climb the Alps is to conquer the mountain. Nail your pitons into the rock and leave them there behind you after you climb. The thing is, because they were never thinking about nailing them in and pulling them out, they made their little pitons out of very soft material, so they weren't reusable. Meanwhile, Americans like Chouinard didn't want to leave climbing pitons behind them. They wanted to respect the rock they were climbing. So he wanted to make pitons that were stiffer and stronger so he could nail them in, pull them out, and reuse them from climb to climb. But because he was hand making these in his setup, he could only make 2 of them per hour. And he starts to sell them because other American climbers realize, I kind of want to climb like this too, with equipment that I can reuse from climb to climb. He had to sell them for $1.50 each, and that was super expensive. European pitons cost about 20 cents each, so he's selling these at something like 8 times what his competitors would be selling them for. But in order to do modern American-style climbing, you needed pitons like his. And he just starts making these out of the back of his van. He makes equipment in the winter. In the summer, he'll be climbing in Yosemite or Wyoming. In the fall, he'll keep climbing until the snowy season hits, and then he'll get right back to making equipment. So it would literally be equipment when he couldn't climb, and climb when he could. His life was not about making money. His life was about climbing and selling just enough product out of the back of his car, these little pitons and carabiners, metal pieces for climbing, to have 50 cents or $1 a day to live on. He was not making it big. His entire goal was just keep climbing, keep climbing, keep climbing, and make barely enough money to get by doing that. He got drafted and discharged from the military, but before, during, and after, he kept making gear, kept on climbing. And as just by word of mouth, the climbing community started to find out about the equipment he was making, he had to hire a few employees to help him keep making equipment. But employees is a strong word. It was really just other hardcore climbers he knew from the climbing community that he knew would understand what great equipment is like and shared his values of this is not a business. This is just a way to let us keep climbing on our own time and give us just enough money to live and do that well. He moves from Burbank, which is inland from the coast of California, out to Ventura so that he's close to the greatest surfing. And that just reinforces his life is about love and nature, surfing the waves, climbing, and making equipment to help others do that and give him just enough money to keep doing that himself. But by word of mouth, demand for his equipment keeps growing in the climbing community. His goal, ever since day one, has been to make absolutely insanely good tools, the best in the world with perfect quality control, because there were lives on the line. If you made a bad carabiner or a bad piton, someone's going to die, including them. They were climbing with their own equipment. So this is the start of his business philosophy of making the best product of whatever he's making. His goal from this point on is always to produce the best in class for whatever he does. This is not big business. His focus is on small, sustainable quality. Around this time, he says, there wasn't much profit at the end of the year. We paid ourselves by the hours worked. None of us saw the business as an end in itself. It was just a way to pay the bills so we could go off on climbing trips. I just read the book I Was about Steve Wozniak last week, and Wozniak, the guy who helped found Apple, had the same mentality. I love engineering. I love designing stuff. I'm not interested on money. Business is just a platform for me to design cool stuff and spread it around to more people. And yet, even though he wasn't really focused on profit and quality, because of his high quality, by word of mouth, his business kept on doubling year over year. By 1970, 14 years after he started, they were the largest supplier of climbing hardware in all of America, which is a niche market, but still really cool. At this point, he makes two big changes to the business model. The first one is changing the climbing business. Instead of pitons, which you nail into the rock and then pull out as you climb, he realized that those were starting to damage the rock, especially places like Yosemite where people would climb the same routes a lot. The rock face was getting really damaged. So he starts to push clean climbing, where you use equipment that doesn't damage the rock the same way. It's not as easy for the climber, but it's better for the routes. And that caused a lot of change in the climbing community. So that's one, is he changes the climbing equipment he's selling. But the other more influential one is that he starts selling clothing. And this is the start, well, as the climbing business starts to peak, Chouinard starts to experiment with a new product line, clothing. First, he tries selling a pair of climbing shorts. Then he goes and buys rugby shirts from teams in England and Australia. And those rugby shirts turn out to be great for climbing because they have a really thick collar, so your climbing harness doesn't hurt your neck. The fabric is super strong, and those shirts start to sell out immediately among climbers. The rugby shirt is a hit product in his climbing community. And he realizes these climbing clothes actually turn me a profit, whereas the climbing hardware that I've been selling barely does. That stuff still gives me like 75% market share in American climbing hardware, but I need to use the clothing to support the climbing business. And as clothing starts to expand, climbing shorts, rugby shirts, a first backpack, some jackets, he and his partners decide to name the clothing line Patagonia. This is the start of what we know today as the Patagonia Company. As they expand into more and more clothes, they make their first major business misstep. As those rugby shirts were selling out all over the place, they really wanted to have more stock to sell to climbers. But the rugby teams in England and Australia were kind of expensive to purchase from. So they went to a factory in Hong Kong and designed their own similar rugby shirt to sell. But it flopped completely because the materials and the build that they got from the Hong Kong factory were just not good at all compared to the material and quality they were getting from the actual rugby teams in England and Australia. Now he has a ton of extra inventory to deal with. Sales are down. They financed a bunch of their company to pay for all those shirts. And this is the first time when he realizes, man, if I'm not careful, my company could die. He has this long quote where he kind of talks about this epiphany he has around this time. And I'm just going to read the whole thing. He says, I'd always avoided thinking of myself as a businessman. I was a climber, a surfer, a kayaker, a skier, a blacksmith. But now we had a heavily leveraged company with employees with families of their own, all depending on our being successful. One day, it dawned on me that I was a businessman and probably would be one for a long time. It was also clear that in order to survive this game, we had to get serious. I also knew that I would never be happy playing by the normal rules of business. I wanted to distance myself as far as possible from those pasty-faced corpses and suits I saw in airline magazine ads. If I had to be a businessman, I was going to do it on my own terms. So now he's got to figure out, how do I build a company that will actually work? Because yes, I'm a climber and an outdoorsman, but I'm also a businessman. So I got to do a good job at it. He starts to read every business book he can possibly get his hands on, things from biographies and histories of other businesses to management philosophies from around the world. He's especially curious about that latter type of book because he knows that there's far more business models and philosophies than just America, and he's very disenchanted with how American business is working, how it doesn't care for the environment, doesn't care for people. A specific thing he really wanted to give in his business was flex time for all his employees. He wanted a culture of people who loved the outdoors, who loved surfing, who loved skiing fresh powder, who loved climbing. And you can't just plan those things into a once-a-year vacation. You go surf when the waves are good. You go ski when the powder is fresh. So he wanted every single worker to have flex time, to go surf when the waves are good and then come back to work, to go ski when the powder is fresh and then come back to work when they can, to go care for their sick kids at home and then work nights and weekends if they need to catch up. He really wanted to blur the distinction between work, play, and family so we could have a culture of people who didn't see Patagonia as just a job, but as part of their lifestyle of loving their family, loving the outdoors, and giving back to those things. As he focuses in on what he wants his business to become, how do I be a phenomenal business person? Chouinard decides to focus on multifunctional technical clothing. It's a lot of syllables. What that means is clothes that are good for one thing, but also work in another arena. Chouinard was an 80%er. He would pursue a hobby or an extreme sport until he got about 80% of the skill in it. Something like kayaking, rock climbing, surfing, fishing. He would pursue it until a high level and then switch, which meant that he had broad exposure to the sorts of equipment and clothing needed across sport disciplines. He finds really cutting-edge materials, knows the individual markets of each sport, and makes excellent equipment for a few of them that he knows will be cross-applicable to other sports. And these multifunctional pieces really start to sell. Next, they decide to take a very counter-market position with their clothing. At this time in the 80s, most clothes are pretty bland in grays or tans or blacks. They drench Patagonia clothes in bright colors. No more boring jackets, yellows and greens and reds. You've seen the crazy colored Patagonia jackets if you're a fan of the brand, and it totally worked. Between the super high quality pieces that were useful in multiple places and the really distinctive color, Patagonia skyrockets from 1980 to 1990. Their sales go from 20 million a year to 100 million a year over that decade. The craziest part is even though his ideal customer is the hardcore outdoor sportsman who wants a super high quality jacket for their specific technical discipline, the pieces that sold the best were not climbing jackets or kayaking equipment. It was the least technical stuff like beach shorts or a bomber jacket, because people loved the brand Patagonia, and the most widely useful clothing was the least technically intensive. When you're growing at a pace of something like 40% a year, year over year over year over year in a physical inventory business where you have to buy clothes and resell them, that's really hard. When they hit about the 100 million a year in revenue mark, they're pushing the edges of their niche, because they started initially just selling climbing equipment and then expanded to the specialty outdoor market. If they kept on this pace, they were on pace to become a $1 billion a year company by the end of the decade. But in order to do that, you would have to start selling to the mass market, not just your particular niche. So now Chouinard is facing some questions. Can the company that wants to make the best in class clothing actually get that big? If you're a 10-table, 3 Michelin star French restaurant, can you keep that quality if you expand to 50 tables? How do you balance being the best also with being big? And as he's trying to figure all this out, a few places start to sue him and his company. When you hit a certain size, you just get a target on you and your company that says, hey, sue me, I'm big and probably have money for you. And these aren't serious lawsuits. These are people who use the equipment in silly ways and then get hurt because of their own actions, but they're still suing the company. And the litigators all thought that the climbing company, Chouinard Climbing, and Patagonia, the clothing company, were the same thing. So even though people were actually suing his climbing hardware company, all the litigators and insurance people tried to make settlements based on the company being as big as Patagonia, which meant that the climbing company had to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy around 1990. So his original baby, blacksmithing climbing equipment out of his van, is gone. And all that's left is the clothing company, Patagonia, which is going totally crazy. They're opening stores all over the world in France and Tokyo and San Francisco. Things are so big that they have to try and figure out how in the world do we manage all these different products going out through catalogs and wholesalers and our retail stores. They restructure the company all over the place. They have 8 different product lines and 3 different distribution channels. And he has this one point in the book where he says we had a new organization chart once a year for 5 years, 5 restructurings in 5 years, and it just never works. He talks about it like we were trying to solve the Rubik's Cube of the organizational development, and they just couldn't solve it because they had so many products going to so many stores all over the world. It's getting unwieldy. Nard decides to visit this guy named Dr. Michael Cammie. He's a business consultant who ran strategic planning at IBM, and he also at some point turned Harley-Davidson motorcycles around. And they go visit this guy who lives on a yacht in Florida. And they get onto Dr. Cammie's yacht, and Dr. Cammie's sitting there and he's like, so, why are you in business? And Chouinard says, well, really, I'm just a craftsman, and I happen to grow a business on the side. If I had enough money, I'd just go live out somewhere in the boonies and give all the rest of it away to charity and help the environment. But we feel responsible to use the money we have to protect the world and the environment. If we sold the company, we don't think the new person who owns the company. And the consultant's just like, that's BS. If you actually wanted to use your money to protect the environment, you'd sell the company for $100 million, give $98 million away, live on $2 million, and call it a day. And since you haven't done that, you're kidding yourself about why you're in the business. And Chouinard says he hears that and really has to do some soul searching about who are we as a company? What are we doing? Because the other thing that's happening around this time is, remember, they can't quite get their company structure right, but they're still growing at 40 to 50% a year, so they're not a super tight company. And then the economy around the world starts to contract a little bit. And during this global contraction, Patagonia only grows by 20% a year. They still grew by 20%, but they were planning on 40 or 50% growth. And that undershooting of the forecast almost killed the company because everything was built around rapid forecasted growth. The amount of inventory they were getting from suppliers, their financing, their hiring systems. So in 1991, as they can't figure out organizational structure, as he's soul searching for what are we actually doing in this business, the economy is contracting. They have to let 20% of their workforce go, about 120 employees. And he says that that was the single darkest day in the company's history. This makes him and a bunch of his leadership partners go on a retreat, think really long and hard about everything they've learned over the last 2 years, and create Patagonia's core values and philosophies, which are surprisingly concrete. I'm going to detail a lot of those for the rest of this episode. When he gets back from the leadership retreat, he personally starts teaching classes to all the employees about the philosophies that Patagonia is built on. And he said that having the philosophies in writing, as well as the shared cultural experience of the classes, was a critical piece of turning the company around. They start to think, how can we do business as Patagonia for 100 more years? How do we grow at a sustainable rate, have people and processes and products that will go on for 100 years. And the last big thing they do, so philosophies, 100-year mindset, and then they have to decide, why are we in business? Is it to make money? Is it to give money to the environment? Because we're not really doing either of those optimally. And what he lands on as a fundamental reason why Patagonia still exists as a business, those two things are for sure accurate. We're making money and giving products to people that will better their lives. We're using money to protect the environment. But a third big reason that was missing before is he wants Patagonia as a corporate structure to be a company that other businesses can learn from. This reminds me a lot of Tony Hsieh and Zappos. After Zappos climbed something like $1 billion market valuation, Tony Hsieh had to sit back and go, why am I doing this? I've built two companies that are worth over $1 billion in aggregate. Why am I still playing the game? Is it to help people? Is it to invest in people? Is it to give to causes? Is it for me to have fun? And he decides that ultimately the most fulfilling and impactful thing he can do is use the business that he's built as an example for other businesses to follow. Other founders, as they get high enough up in the game, end up landing on this same thing of, I want to use my expertise to influence other people in similar situations. And since this reset for Patagonia of having philosophies that they embed into their culture, 100-year mindset, and really crystallizing that we're in business to be an example to other companies, the last 20-ish years of the company have been much more straight line growth. So instead of talking about that, I want to dig into the philosophies and principles that make Patagonia such a fascinating company. And Chouinard details these all over the place. I picked a few of my favorite ones to highlight. The first are his 16 questions to ask about product, his philosophy of product design. He says that we always want the best products, but how do you actually tell if something is the best? Isn't that kind of subjective? He gives his team 16 questions to think through. Is it functional? Then is it multifunctional? Is it durable? And he describes durable like a pair of Levi's jeans where it's a super well-made product. Instead of there being one point of failure, it starts to get holes in like 4 or 5 different places all at once. It wears at about the same rate. Contrast that with something like a computer where one piece goes out and you got to replace the whole thing. Fourth, is it repairable? Does it fit the core customer? Talks about designing slimmer clothes for climbers versus relaxed fit for fishermen. Is it as simple as possible? I want to park on this for a second. Is the design as simple as possible while still being functional? Here are 2 great quotes to talk about this. First, complexity is often a sure sign that the functional needs have not been solved. So good. So good. If the thing is ridiculously all over the place, you probably have lost sight of how do we minimally and perfectly get to our goal. Second, once you lose the discipline of functionality as a design guidepost, the imagination runs amok. Is it as simple as possible? Does it get the job done with the minimum steps to that point? 7th, is the product line simple? He doesn't want Patagonia to be selling 20 different pairs of ski pants. Each product should have a specific use, and there shouldn't be tons of different products all designed for the same use case. 8th, is this an innovation or an invention? My favorite quote in the book was under this section, and I'm just going to read the whole thing because it says so much about who Chouinard was. He said, when I die and go to hell, the devil's going to make me the marketing director for a cola company. I'll be in charge of trying to sell a product that no one needs, is identical to its competition, and can't be sold on its merits. I'd be competing head on in the cola wars on price, distribution, advertising, and promotion, which would indeed be hell for me. Remember, I'm the kid who couldn't play competitive games. I'd much rather design and sell products so good and unique they have no competition. His mindset is be the best. Create something never created before. That's why he asks, is this an innovation or an invention? He wants to be the best and he wants to do it quickly. Inventions he defines as true new ideas. Inventions are extremely rare. He says even the most brilliant geniuses only get 2 or 3 legitimate inventions in their lifetime. But once something is invented, a genuinely new idea or discovery comes into the world, there can be thousands of innovations within months of one of them. Innovations are the ways that this new invention is applied to the world. And his goal with asking the question, is this an innovation or invention, is I want to make the best product and I want to be fast at it. We need to get to market before our competitors. Therefore, we cannot spend time as a company inventing something new. Otherwise, we will spend 20, 30 years on one breakthrough, make the breakthrough, and then be behind the rest of the market because we haven't been keeping up with what they've been doing. Instead, constantly watch the market for inventions, then innovate on those new ideas, the new material, the new technology, the new market that's opened up based on a technology, which is such a cool philosophy to me. Because if your goal is the best quality, but you also want it to have utility in the market, this is a really good mental model for it. Is this an invention that we've spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours figuring out, or an innovation where we apply an invention to our particular use case? Anyway, that was 8, invention, innovation. 9, is this a global design? Will it work in San Francisco, Japan, and Europe? 10th, is this something easy to care for and clean? 11th, does this product have any added value to it? Really interesting idea, because he says that when you think about it, only 10 or 15% of the money consumers spend is on the things they actually need. The rest of your 85, 90% of your money is spent on higher quality upgrades to those things. Like how you could get nutrition from a pound of hamburger meat, but you will happily pay way more money for a pound of filet mignon because it's higher quality. It's value added to the same function. 12th, is it authentic? That word gets thrown around a lot, but he points to the rugby shirts that he used to sell and how the authentic rugby shirts were the ones you actually got from the rugby team in England or Australia. And the non-authentic ones are the ones they manufactured in Hong Kong. It was, in theory, the same shirt with the same use case and the same material, but one was just made to do the job, and the other one was made to be like the thing that did the job. 13th, is it beautiful? 14th, are we just chasing fashion? 15th, are we designing for our core customer? And he was ruthlessly precise about who is our ideal customer, to the point where it's kind of extreme. In his mind, he's picturing a dirtbagger who can barely afford our clothes but loves the outdoors. The person who is hardcore about their discipline, doesn't care about money, and just wants the absolute best equipment for the job, that's the core customer. Surprising from a premium company like Patagonia. And 16th, does it cause unnecessary harm to the user, our company, or the environment? So that's product. How do we make the best product? And his whole 16-question mental model for that. Next area I wanted to highlight was his area of production. And there were 4 big ideas in here I wanted to touch on. First, he says that business is a race. Speed is extremely important. This goes back to innovation versus invention. The hardest challenge in business, he says, is maintaining urgency throughout the company. You can't be too conservative or scientific. You can't just study a problem over and over again until you get it, because by that point, the competition's already done the thing and you're in the dust. The way an entrepreneur grows is by taking a step, see if it feels good, doing it again, over and over and over again. Learn by doing. Constantly prioritizing speed to market. Second production philosophy. Involve the designer with the producer. I've read about this both with Elon Musk at Tesla and also with Steve Jobs at Apple. The designer, the person who's vision casting, and the producer, the one executing on it, have to work together at the front end of the process so that the vision aligns with what can actually be made, and the producer can give creative feedback to the designer so that they can work within constraints. The third thing about production, he says that we want to develop long-term relationships with our suppliers and contractors. His ideology with Patagonia is they want the minimum number of suppliers and contractors that they can manage. He thinks mutual dependency is a good thing. He wants dependency on a supplier, but he also wants them to be dependent on him. He wants all the suppliers and customers to basically feel like if we do well, Patagonia does well, and vice versa. He doesn't care about competition and leverage much. Finally, weigh quality first against on-time delivery and low cost. So there's the triangle in business of quality, speed, price. You can only pick 2. In his mind, quality always wins. We will never be the fast product, but expensive and high quality. And we will never be the expensive product that's fast, but cheap. We will always weight quality first above speed and price. Marketing My favorite piece of this section was that he talks a little bit about promotion and branding. He says that branding is telling people who we are, and promotion is selling people on our product. And he talks about how to promote. There are 3 guidelines he lays out for the promotional efforts of Patagonia. First, our promotional charter, when we're selling people on the product, is to inspire and educate rather than promote. Second, we would rather earn credibility than buy it. The best resources for us, Patagonia, are the word of mouth recommendation from a friend or favorable comments in the press. And third, we advertise only as a last resort, and usually in sport-specific magazines. So his whole methodology for selling the product is inspire, educate, and earn credibility. Don't push it. Advertise as a last resort. Help our audience. Trust that they're intelligent. They're not shopping just to shop. They want to simplify their life down, and they're fed up with ads. He treats people like people and sells accordingly. His mindset about money as a company is fascinating because even though he is such an outdoorsman and isn't thinking about business from a purely capitalist perspective, he still has a head on his shoulders for numbers. One of my favorite quotes was he said, "It's okay to be eccentric as long as you're right. It's okay to be eccentric as long as you're rich. Otherwise, you're just crazy." He recognizes that money does play into their credibility as a company that is so heavily advocating for the earth and natural rights. He says, "We never wanted to be a big company. We want to be the best company. And it's easier to try to be the best small company than the best big company." He laid down that guidance at the outset of the finance section because so often the numbers can run away with your company, but he says no. Quality first, numbers serve quality. Size for the sake of size is bad. Our number one goal is being best in class. That's why his best product philosophy is so complex. Numbers and size will never get in the way of that. Being the best small company is better than being the worst big company. And last, he says, we will never, ever sell our company. We would rather have constant efficiency than constant growth. We're going to revise our strategic plan every 6 months and not go public because our goal is to be a closely held, efficiently run private company that for the next 100 years can use our money and position to do good for the environment. I mentioned his HR philosophy of give people flexibility, trust them with their flex time, because we want to attract people who will love going out in nature and attract independent thinkers who will do things that they believe in, but not things they don't believe in, which is hard to manage because often people like that will outright refuse to work on something or be highly demotivated unless they just get it or latch on to the idea. But it also means that you have excellent people who will not abuse the trust you give them. The last thing in his philosophies I wanted to touch on is environmentalism. His policies around protecting the environment and giving back to the environment are a massive part of his identity as a person and his business practices that I didn't spend a lot of time on, but all throughout the company history, they're constantly giving money back to grassroots environmental causes, 1% off the top. And in 2022, they restructured Patagonia. You could say they sold it, but they sold it to a collective of nonprofits who take the bottom line of the company, all profits, and reinvest them out into environmental causes. Patagonia itself is still a for-profit company, but they're owned by this nonprofit hold company. Patagonia, the company, recognizes as a for-profit, we can still influence the rest of the business world and create excellent products that better the consumers' lives. But the money at the end of all of it is going back to protect the planet. Fascinating combination of Chouinard's effective capitalism with drive to be an outdoorsman and not a businessman for businessman's sake. Before you go, if this was a valuable episode for you, please take just a second and post about it on your social media, because the only way a podcast like this grows is through word of mouth. And if you found it valuable, your friends will probably also find it valuable. If you want little nuggets of what I'm currently reading in your social media feed, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm Brandon True, or on Twitter at Brandoni813.